Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. A little too bright there. A little better. Okay. Hi, friends. I hope that you're in a safe place and healthy. Today, I don't think we'll do 3 terms. We may get through 2. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this first one, religion, because I've talked about it so many times. You've already heard it. So I'm just going to read through this. What I'm going to spend more time on is the next one, which is soul. That one comes up a lot, especially in translations. And I especially want to grab the attention of Nichiren Shu people, or ex-Nichiren Shu, or other sects that have adopted this Western religious rhetoric of soul and faith and on and on and on. It's so not Buddhist. And please don't be offended by that. It's not your fault. These are translations that have been inculcated for centuries in traditions. They're just not Buddhist. And hopefully by reading this book, by listening, by participating, and looking at, Nichiren and myself, especially because Nichiren is also translated, right, by these biases. But I'm not affected by the biases so much because my life has been spent breaking free of the biases. When I started doing these videos, it was still in me. There probably still are corners in me that it slips right by. That's the nature of it, because we're raised into it. We're trained into it. Yeah, old tapes playing. But by the time I've made this book now, I'm pretty darn aware, over 40 years of practice, it just becomes obvious. The more you study, the more you go, what? How can you say this is a quotation of Nichiren or Shakyamuni or Tendai, and then in the very next sentence, bleh, what? It just becomes that obvious. So, religion, it's a tough one, because religion, especially when it comes to North America, and maybe this is worldwide, I don't know, I haven't lived everywhere, but religion is one of these words, topics, ideas, that has a congregation, training, belief system, churchy side, right? And it has this very distinctly other legal, governmental control, taxation, so on and so forth, side. So much so that you can't separate them. The United States of America was set up primarily to avoid and get out of or under the auspices of monarchies, totalitarianism, dictatorship, governance by a wholly sanctioned body, and there it is. And at the very same time, it's the First Amendment of the Constitution. If you want to practice religion, that's on you. But there ain't no requirement. We ain't going to mess with it. It's totally separate from the laws governing this country. Religion itself. So nobody's under the auspices of a religion, even though the religionists that are infecting all sorts of parts of government want you to believe the United States is a Christian country. There's a far lower percentage of actual religious practicing people, whether it's Christian or many other religions in this country, than there are what I would say free people who are actually protected by the Constitution to not to have to deal with religion. But it gets into the schools, and then people fight and get it back out, and then certain states want, well, we're religious here, so we're going to have prayer in school, and it goes on and on and on and on, and I'm spending too much time on religion. But it's important to remember that this is not the track of Buddhism. Buddhism is about rational thought. It's about how your mind works and how you can become the driver, the programmer, the navigator of your mind and therefore your experience of life, rather than just submit to all the programming from government, society, blah, 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 right? That doesn't mean you're allowed to disobey laws, but it means that you make up your own mind. You are responsible for your experience. You can't claim victimhood. You can't say, oh, woe is me. I mean, you can complain, but you can complain knowing that it's up to you to fix it, right? You can't play the blame game. This is why I. See, that's that why word. I made videos on that. That's a trap. Why? Think about how. Who's doing the work of imposing these hardships on myself? This is what Buddhism's all about. Okay? So it's actually antithetical. It's actually opposite to religion, because religion's always about magical thinking, things you can't prove or disprove. Well, if you can't prove it, of course you can't disprove it. How is that somehow a proof that it is? I hear that all the time from religionists. Yeah? You can't prove it. Well, we can't disprove it. Oh, okay. I can't prove that all of us actually have rectangular heads, but you can't disprove it, so maybe... What are you, psychotic? There's none of that in Buddhism, okay? Now, there's a lot of language to teach people to their capacity, but that's not Buddhism's fault. That's just the effort of language to try to get people to come along and develop their sense of their mind. And you got to use the words people know. When you finally get to the Lotus Sutra, a ton of that is gone, because it's about how Shakyamuni himself attained enlightenment, enlightened himself, such that we can all do the same as he did. A universal teaching, yeah? No magic, just get to work, okay? So religion in several sources on the internet, the belief, there's that word, the belief in and reverence for a supernatural power or powers regarded as creating and governing the universe. Well, there it is right off the bat, not Buddhism. If you're looking for the power, it's your mind. Right? This is also why I hate that silly prayer that the Alcoholics Anonymous and all those groups do. The serenity prayer. Yeah, it's serene to be a sheep, because you don't have to, you can blame it on everything else. It ain't me. I can change this. I can change when I go to the bathroom. But, I can't change somebody shooting me with a gun. Victims. 2, a particular variety of such belief, especially when organized into a system of doctrine and practice. There's that government entity. You see why you can't unstick religion from governance? It's intensely political. Even it's happened in Buddhism. We talk about it all the time. When it tends to turn to politics, it becomes religion instead of a science of mind. Yeah? Third, a set of beliefs, values, and practices based on the teachings of a spiritual leader and agreed upon by the group. Ugh, that's a sticky one. You have to understand that what we practice isn't beliefs. Get that square in your mind. We don't believe Nichiren. We don't even believe Shakyamuni. We don't believe the Lotus Sutra. What we practice is a method for checking our mind and moving ourselves closer and closer to a mind consistently awakened. Buddha-ness, yeah? And how do we don't just do that with hope, right? We don't pray. We don't worship. We manifest. That's the proof. Yeah, we do have proof. Each and every one of us individually, when we instantiate, chant Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Dugangyo, we walk into the world awakened. It may diminish quickly if you haven't done it long. It may last throughout the day. You may have some traumatic event that happens and blows you away. It's still working, but you may be less aware of it. And when you're less aware of it, you're aware you're less aware of it, right? Your experience dictates your knowledge, your proof. This works. I need to do more of it. It's like when you start exercising. It's not appealing. And you do some, and suddenly it's appealing because, wow, look at the difference. Look at my waistline. Look at my shoulders. Look at you see and experience the result. Right? It's actual. All right, this one is a little muddy. I think that it is clear, though, that a common usage, the first definition invoking the use or plea to supernatural or mystical powers or gods is the most common. That's how most people think of religion. This is what is commonly known as magical thinking, though this is an oxymoron. I love that I put that in there. It's magical, but it really ain't thinking. Because as a Buddhist, you know, if you're thinking, the magic kind of poof goes away because you understand. But if you think with a magical mind, anything is possible. Any abhorrent thing is possible. Any way of getting out of responsibility and control of your own life is possible. The essential point is that this word has wrought tremendous confusion in the propagation of Shakyamuni's teachings. This confusion has also been the justification for all manner of organized authoritarian corporations, quote unquote, of Buddhist religion, right? Once again, the spiritual leader or supernatural powers that govern the Buddhist practitioner's universe is the mind of that individual and nothing else. Do you believe in your mind? Well, you have actual proof, as I was saying earlier. What other choice do you have? Truly. All of Buddhist teachings are directed toward the analysis and method for fully implementing the potential of the sentient mind for the purpose of living this life free of self-impediments. A substitute, anytime you see the word religion, just slide it over and put the word practice in there. Because, see, practice is something we do, like exercise. It begets results that are verifiable, right? No mysticism. All right, that's enough on religion. I'm tired of that word. But had to be said, yeah? Now, to those who can't seem to understand the concept of impermanence, emptiness, that things only exist in the mind, when the mind is alive. When we die, the body dies, the whole support system for this sentience to emerge from, it's gone. Therefore, no sentience. Awakening, Buddha-ness, is a state we reach in this life. Every time we chant, we invoke it, right? Years ago, I used the example, somebody was asking me about the daimoku. And I said, how many examples have you had in your life, either yourself or a sibling or other children, that when they're in crisis, they just start asking for mom, 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 right? Is it truly the person, mom, that they're calling forth? Or is the chant, the singing of the word mom, represent all of the safety, security, loving embrace, protection? That's what they want, right? It's weird how we use language. You have to be aware of how we use language. But the idea that momness, or a particular mom, is in the ether, it's completely useless. Why would we do that? All right. Soul, noun. These are bullet points again, taken from the internet. And this actually, because this word has been in use for so many centuries, millennia, it's taken on a kind of a different life depending on what group is using it. It's fascinating. The first bullet point here is a typical, traditional, and wholly not Buddhist definition. A part of humans regarded as immaterial. How is it a part of humans regarded as immaterial? Are they talking about the mind? Immortal. Oh, well, no. Not the mind. Separable from the body at death. Ooh. Hello, Tibet. Right? The Dalai Lama knows that that's a crock. I've heard him in an interview say, yes, I know. And asked directly, why don't you correct people? Why don't you let them know that this is fantasy? It's not even Buddhist. And you know what his response was, right? I don't want to hurt their feelings. What? How can you be a bodhisattva and allow this expletives deleted idea to fester and continue in the population you supposedly lead? You're not a bodhisattva then. I mean, how many times have we read from Shakyamuni? Right? I think it's in Peaceful Practices. I forget what chapter. He specifically guidelines us, you and I, you and me, how we should behave as Buddhists. And if somebody is using bad, misleading language or misunderstanding the teachings, it's our responsibility to go, sorry. We're not going to call them names or call her this or that. It's up to us to correct them and for them to take that correction to heart. That's how we help propagate the correct teaching. If we don't do that, hello, Nichiren, his whole life was dedicated to that. If we don't do that, we're just as guilty of the misleading teachings. Sorry. And this soul is supposed to be capable of moral judgment. The mind is capable of moral judgment. This soul. And susceptible to happiness or misery in a future state. Wow. Wow. Whoever wrote that description of the soul, whenever that came about, whether it was Christianity or Muslim or Hinduism, because it's in there, Jainism, it's all over the place. It's thousands of years old, this thinking. It sounds like sorcery, doesn't it? Seriously. I guess this is where ghosts come from. That's my own note there. Secondly, another delusional definition indicative of the fear of death, which motivates most, if not all, religion, right? I mean, if you're not living this life of any worth, and your only hope for joy is after you die, then there's good reason to fear death because there's judgment there, right? It's like going to court the first time you ever went to court. Yikes, right? You're not in control. You're a marionette. That's not Buddhism. It's just not. Buddhism's about this life right now. The second bullet point is this part of a human, when disembodied after death, that's just a fact. They just stated like it's a fact. And I put in parentheses, disembodied? What? Okay, so this whole mechanism of, and don't forget that your body, your excellent machine here, is an amalgam of creations of energies that includes the entire universe. You think of your body as a separate thing, but it's absolutely connected and vibrating moment to moment to moment with the entire universe. Because there's not an element or atom in you that didn't come from that exploding plasma that started creating hydrogen, helium, cooling, creating other elements. So they're you and me. That's what this body is. And this body, all of it, exists to emerge this mind, this sentient mind. If this dies, what, the sentient mind just becomes a different colored balloon? And 99 wolf balloons are just, whee. What? It's just nonsense. Third, most interesting Western idea, and this is, the Greeks are responsible for this. In fact, I point out, in Aristotelian philosophy, an animating or vital principle inherent in living things and endowing them with various degrees with the potential to grow and reproduce, to move and respond to stimuli, as in the case of animals, and to think rationally, as in the case of humans. Aristotle was pointing to the soul. He was trying to make sense of it. And he was pointing to the soul as energy that manifests. People heard it spiritually, which is that wishy-washy word. But he's talking about motive force. He's talking about Tai Chi. He's talking about formations. But he's using a different language. You see? That is actually the language that then becomes adopted in much psychology. The case of animals. And to think rationally, one, I think the reference here is to the word anima. A noun, the inner self of an individual, the soul, right? The formations of, except all the dissections of Buddhism aren't available to his thinking at the time. So he just groups the whole thing, like the Nidana, you might say, as what forms the form. And he says, we'll say that's the soul. a much more logical, reasonable thought, still totally incorrect because it has this element of eternalism, which is just people afraid to die, right? If you're afraid of death, then the logical solution is saying, well, we'll just live again, so don't be afraid, right? When Christmas is over, everyone's happy in the church because they know next year we'll have another one. That doesn't make it any more real. It's just a sales event, right? The Jungian psychology, the unconscious or true inner self of an individual as opposed to the persona or outer aspect of the personality. Ooh, psychology got tricky there. So they're identifying the soul as this other part of the mind that's unconscious. In other words, non-sentient. In Buddhism, we don't allow for that. We have 9 levels of consciousness. Some of them we're aware of, some of them we're not. And when we chant Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, we awaken that core consciousness that we're usually sleeping through, our Buddha consciousness. And when we do, it blasts through all the other 8 consciousnesses to make us one, the thus come one of Buddha. Right? So the sentient mind is all of it. It's just whether it's in use or not, And the psychologists and neuropsychologists can all argue about that all day long, about how your dream state and your mind works while you're asleep. And they cop to all of that. They know that that's happening, and yet, but that's unconscious. Well, how is it unconscious if it's working things out so that the next morning I wake up knowing more? That kind of sounds like consciousness to me, right? So, soul, very destructive term. Destructive to our reason, our rational thinking, our Buddhist practice. As shown above, there is a gamut of ideas about this word, from the Aristotelian to the modern religiously influenced dominant interpretation. In the era of Shakyamuni, the deeply mystical and magical thinking of the traditions in India demanded a complete and utter denial of this delusion, complete with afterlife and reincarnation. Rather than spend precious time to disprove a concept that has no basis in reality and therefore unassailable, Shakyamuni instead focused on reality of observable truth and human verifiable experiences as antidote for this delusion of an eternal container of personality and afterlife. The processes of thought, citas, skandhas, karma, impermanence, emptiness, cycle of birth and death, moment to moment to moment to moment, samsara, and more, all of these teachings all destroy the idea of some permanent personality bopping along through some eternity or alternate universe. This word is anathema to Buddhist thought. I can't state it any more strongly than this. Even from, and I'll give you some quotations here so you know it's not just me babbling along. Even from within the so-called Buddhist communities today, I'm not proud of all of them, that's for sure. We have the following examples. What follows are a couple of examples on the subject as regards the term anatman or anatta from recognized sources, right? Barbara O'Brien updated on February 18th, 2019, very recent. The doctrine of anatman, Sanskrit anatta in Pali, is the core teaching of Buddhism. The core teaching in Buddhism. You know what anatman means? No soul. According to this doctrine, she goes on, there is no self, interesting, in the sense of a permanent, integral, autonomous being within an individual existence. She slipped from soul to self. It's an interesting trick. It's not entirely unjustified, but it's still a trick. What we think of as our self, the me, that inhabits our body is just an ephemeral experience. Yeah, we talk about this it's called samsara, Barbara. It is the doctrine that makes Buddhism distinctive from other spiritual traditions, such as Hinduism, which maintains that Atman, the self, exists. If you don't understand Anatman, you will misunderstand most teachings of the Buddha. Unfortunately, Anatman is a difficult teaching that is often overlooked or misinterpreted. Hallelujah. Anatman is sometimes misunderstood to mean that nothing exists. But this is not what Buddhism teaches. It's more accurate to say that there is existence, but that we understand it in a one-sided and delusional way. With anatta, although there is no self or soul, finally, there is, and this part is just lazy and incorrect, still afterlife, rebirth, and fruition of karma. Sorry, Barbara, you were on the right track until you said that. Right view and right actions are necessary for liberation. That's from the Noble Eightfold Path, right? So I put a note in here. How could she get so much right and then add this nonsense at the end? Even a scholar, right? From the Encyclopedia of Buddhism online, Anatman is the last of the three marks of existence and a central doctrine of Buddhism. There it is again. This term is translated as not self, non-self, impersonality, etc. Okay, we could add a lot of terms to that. The Buddha said, quote, I have taught one thing and one thing only. That is suffering and the end of suffering. His end quote. His teachings on Anatman are taught in this vein. The doctrine of Anatman is not an ontological statement. It is a soteriological statement. That is, it is not a statement about whether or not a so-called self, Atman, exists or does not exist. It is a statement about how we can relate to the self, I, me, mine, in a skillful way. Now, I just talked about that recently. Okay, that's the end of that quote from the Encyclopedia of Buddhism. I go on here to say, specifically, the Buddha noted that we tend to think of the self as something that is permanent and as something that exists independently from the world around us. We think and act as if there is an I or me that is somehow unique, independent, and permanent. This way of relating to I or me leads to different types of attachment that cause us to suffer. In the teachings on Anatman, not self, the Buddha presents a skillful way to relate to the self that can lead to a decrease in suffering and eventually to liberation. We can see that the idea of soul, quote unquote, is a complete contradiction to the teaching of Buddhism from Shakyamuni Buddha. Why prominent sects and schools continue to use this term is incomprehensible and an affront to Buddhism and its scholarship. Even substitutions can only approximate an attempt to address this word, since it is not conceptually related to Buddhism other than being utterly outside of the discussion. So rather, when you see the word soul come up, you should shift gears in your mind and think, engine of life. In other words, what produces life? Not yours, not mine, not a specific, all life. Right? That kind of blows apart the eternal soul idea as a personal floating entity. Remember my little quip, bag of Bob or box of Betty? Yeah, no. There's no UPS, universal UPS or FedEx packaging of souls floating around, okay? No, I won't even say it. Another substitute on the other side of the coin is ego. If you must refer to something soul-like, then understand that it's the delusion of self, the ego. So from a Buddhist perspective, if you're looking for the engine of life that creates all manifestations, that's the engine of life. If you're looking for how it appears in our daily samsaric existence, mind, that's the ego. There's no specialness to that, right? The ego's gone when you perish. It's extinct. All right, where are we time-wise? 35 minutes. All right. Short last word, and then we'll move on to something else. No, that'll be the end of the book. Yikes. Okay. Let's just finish with the last one. It's a short one. I had to include it because Tibetan Buddhism has gotten so much press. It's just like I try to look for Buddhist resources to just round out my knowledge and experience and study. And I've tried a couple of times to subscribe to Tricycle Magazine, but man, those editors and writers are so focused on Tibetan and early teachings. It just gets too annoying to read. Every now and again, like Jacqueline Stone will have an article that pops up about Nichiren Buddhism or medieval time Buddhism and the Lotus Sutra, but it's super rare. And it's under a cloud of that earlier teaching, misunderstanding, soul kind of crud. So anyway, one of the key, even if you don't know about Buddhism, you've probably heard of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, right? I did, and I was curious, what is that about? And then I learned the term bardo. And after reading that book, I thought, this is not Buddhism. Where did it come from? Oh, where do I find it? This is a leftover from Hindu again, like reincarnation. Gosh darn it, can't you stop doing that? Isn't Shakyamuni enough? My goodness, it's difficult enough to get through the mire to get the clear idea of what Shakyamuni was teaching. Thank you, Nichiren. Thank you, Dengyo. Thank you, Dendai. Thank you, right? Scholarship. Why do you have to rely on flying elephants and go? It boggles my mind. Bardo. The Tibetans love this one. They dedicate an entire book to it along with a litany of practices. This is another leftover of early Hinduism thought and revolves around the idea of remaining, quote unquote, levels of consciousness after death or in the process of death. A process only defined by this magical assumption that consciousness can continue beyond the mind that conceives it. And make no mistake, you may be practicing with certain groups and organizations and calling yourself Nichiren Buddhists, but who among you hasn't heard that when your relative or someone you know dies, you have 7 days to reach them, and then 14 days, although that's diminished, 28 days, all the way to, what is it, 46, 47? I don't remember now. They're all multiples of 7, those days of reaching them, right? I was told that about my sister when she passed away. It's a crock, folks. That comes from the Bardo stuff. That's Hinayana Buddhism. It's not even Hinayana. I'm sorry. I meant to say, come on, Sylvain. Hindu. That's from Hinduism, the magical, mystical king of philosophies. It's crept its way in. I'm sorry. I'm the bubble burster. I told you a long time ago. I'm the kid in the crowd that goes, hey, the emperor's naked. I just won't tolerate it. It's ridiculous. The emperor's naked. You know the story, right? Look it up if you've not heard of it before. I know we're international, our Songhas everywhere. You may not have heard of The Emperor's New Clothes. If you haven't, you can easily find it online. It's a short story. It's a good story again, about how our minds are manipulated and influenced by others. I probably should have included it in the analogies. All right. A substitute, put an end to it, extinction. Shakyamuni used it. Shakyamuni foretold his own extinction. In fact, he taught very much on the basis of, what are you all going to do when I'm gone? He didn't say, my spirit will be around. Right? All right. That's it. I could probably put a lot more in here, but I'm probably annoying you more than I'm annoying me. I just had to get these things out there so that there's a reasonable voice for you to consider. Come up with your own insights on this. It's so blindingly obvious you can't miss it. It just takes one person to say, have you thought about that? Yeah. Do you see what that is? Because you'll see it. That's your proof, by the way. All right, this is a long one, longer than I meant to go. I'm really happy you're all here and taking care of yourselves. Keep practicing. Support this Sangha any way you can. A few seconds of liking and subscribing is really propagation. So that's Bodhisattva Act. If you can, purchase ebooks or print books, or, there's a lot of free stuff, the podcasts, and lots of information on threefoldlotus.com on the core study materials page, yeah? And by all means, please get a copy of a Nichiren inscribed Gohonzon, or a mandala of Gohonzon. Not some copy with other signatures and information. That's not, we practice Nichiren's doctrine, not some authoritarian leader of an organization, right? Okay. Enough rebellion for one day. I just want you to practice correctly. That's my only motivation here, okay? Thank you for doing that. Thank you for sticking around. I so respect, and I feel such a profound sense of gratitude for you guys. Please keep your practice strong. Take care of your health, and I'll see you in the next one when I figure out what that's going to be. Okay? Bye for now.
Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry.